Coming up, the fight against racism online and in stadiums. We interview the English FA's Director of International and Diversity, Edeline John. Plus, an assessment of week one of the Saudi ownership of Newcastle, big changes looming for the FIFA EA game, and there's news of Gianni Infantino's fresh World Cup plans on a tour of Israel. We'll also discuss vaccine mandates in US sports, big changes to the Commonwealth Games, and there's swimming news too. Hello and welcome to the definitive sports news podcast, Sport Unlocked. Just the one pod as usual this week. Unlike the World Cup, we wouldn't want to dilute the enjoyment with doubling the frequency too often. We do, though, have the same participants. Joining me, Rob Harris from the Associated Press, as ever, are Tariq Panja from the New York Times and Martyn Ziegler from the Times. And it's enjoyable for us not just to check out the league tables, but also those global pod standings too.
Yeah, hi guys. We're number 7 in Croatia in sports podcasts there. It's probably all those footballers who are sort of quarantining there so they don't have to spend time in hotels. Either that or we're just lots of very, very people with lots of very good taste in Croatia.
You did have a very interesting reporting trip there once, didn't you?
Now, back in my days before as a news reporter, it was right after at the end of the Bosnian Serbian Civil War, Croatian Civil War as well. I was part of a group of reporters who went out to Bosnia, Croatia with Michael Portillo, then the Defence Secretary, who was to report on the peace process that was going on at the time. So yeah, we went to Dubrovnik. And then Sarajevo, landed at Sarajevo Airport in the middle of the night. Put onto a helicopter, taken to an army base, which was quite exciting because while we were flying into the base and complete pitch black, the automatic anti-surface-to-air missile system fired by the helicopter, and so we took evasive action, but actually it was a false alarm, thankfully. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to you now.
Well, Ziggs, it'll be a much more gentler experience travelling with Michael now. I'm casual viewer of his railway journeys, and I think some of them have taken place through Croatia and the Balkans. Do you think you might fancy another trip with Michael on one of those railway journeys with Ziggs and Portillo?
I could do quite like his railway journeys. Yeah, it was a very different sort of experience, that one.
Did have an interesting drive through Bosnia a few years ago, though. My memory of Mostar is actually standing on the bridge there doing a radio live interview about the arrest of Villalona, the Spanish FA head at the time in 2017.
Oh yeah, a blast from the past. Speaking of the past, Martyn, long way back, bit of news from the world of swimming.
Yeah, really interesting this from Craig Lord, who is done a report for Times. Craig also does the State of Swimming website. Very, very well-positioned guy in very, very knowledgeable about swimming and doping. He's done an interview with the new president of the World Swimming Federation, FINA, our old friend Hussein Al-Musallam. But intriguingly, Al-Musallam is saying he is going to consider awarding gold medals to the likes of Sharon Davies, who she was robbed of the gold medal at the 1980 Moscow Olympics by an East German doper, Petra Schneider, who has since admitted she was doping, part of the infamous East German doping network. And now Hussein Al-Musallam said he's going to put pressure on the IOC for a sort of reconciliation process and to allow the likes of Sharon Davies to get the gold medal from which they were cheated out of.
This all brings into sharper focus how much we disregard records and achievements set throughout, particularly the 80s, and whether or not we need to sort of wipe out the record books in the likes of swimming, athletics, and other sports from that period.
If swimming is to do this, I'm not sure what sort of pressure the captain is able to bring to bear on Thomas Bach. But if he is successful, there's going to be a bunch of other sports as well, presumably, that will, whether they want to or not, there'll be athletes from the era who'll say, hang on a minute, what about us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are lots of records that still stand from there. I mean, I think Flojo, if I'm not mistaken, I think her record still stands from 1988. Yeah, you're right. You can absolutely imagine the IOC will do anything they can not to do this, because they will be terrified it opens a can of worms and creates controversies around all these former um, Olympic Games records and medals and stuff, and they really don't like looking back on that dark time of the games.
Yeah, it wouldn't be like the IOC to slow a process down at all, would it?
Although it might help the Olympics going forward, because then they get to proclaim more records being set at future games, and more achievements, almost sort of forgetting the past, allows them to deliver new headlines at future games while having that clear disconnect between the leadership now and then, so they can blame the past and it doesn't reflect as if it was, say, looking at something in the last decade or so.
Yeah, I mean, it is something Seb Coe, for example, the World Athletics president, has talked about in the past. But I think it's when do you draw that line to say, this was. I think his idea was when there was proper drug testing came in, but even that's difficult. We've seen so many records set as a result of these super shoes, for example, that the whole thing becomes slightly ludicrous anyway.
Well, good for Sharon Davis's punditry work that we do know swimming, that will be one of the guaranteed sports in the Commonwealth Games going forward, but only swimming and athletics out of the previous 16 compulsory sports in the Games. It's all part of changes looking at beyond 2026 for an event that might seem pretty outdated, particularly to those of our listeners around the world outside of the Commonwealth and the former British Empire.
This is, I have very, very split opinions about this. I mean, I can understand the fact that Commonwealth Games is struggling. They can't get a host, basically, for the 2026 Games, not properly. The Commonwealth Games Federation is refusing to even discuss the possibilities, and now what's happened is that they've brought up this plan. So you just only have these two definite sports, and they're going to have more urban sports and more choice by the host cities about what they're going to play. For something like netball and squash, this is an absolute disaster, because they're not in the Olympics. This is their big opportunity to shine on the global stage. And now, especially for netball, which is such a sort of big women's sport across so many different countries, um, if they are not included in future Commonwealth Games, that would just be a tragedy.
Well, would it not be an idea? I think we've discussed this on the pod with the Olympics in mind. When we had the concern over Tokyo and whether it would go ahead or not, for the Commonwealth Games organisers to perhaps be a bit more innovative about the future, maybe host the Commonwealth Games across the Commonwealth at the same time, so one city or one country isn't burdened with the entire cost of an event that doesn't draw eyeballs, doesn't perhaps raise the revenue that would foot the bill. Potentially, is that maybe an idea? Some innovation needed.
Well, it's something they say they're open to, actually, multiple cities and countries potentially banding together to host the Commonwealth Games. And we've already seen it with next year's games in Birmingham. The cycling will take place in London because there isn't a velodrome in Birmingham.
The fact that they've said that athletics and swimming is definitely going to be there. I mean, some people might say that those are the sports where there's sort of least demand for, or least need to have them. In Birmingham, they're holding the Commonwealth Games athletics events next year, like just a week away from the World Athletics Championships in Oregon. So you can see from that point that makes almost no sense at all. I mean, that obviously has been forced on it by the pandemic, but even so, it's not a very, very good state of affairs. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens now with future hosts and whether this is going to bring forward lots more interest. But it does show that actually there is definitely a crisis within the movement.
It's not just the Commonwealth Games Federation issuing a roadmap for the future this week. We've also been hearing from FINA, the World Swimming Body, talking about how it wants to try to better promote the sport. It seems the name is one of the issues. How does FINA resonate with any regular sports fan? What do they know? How do they know what that means?
Well, it resonates with me because when I was growing up, down the bottom of my road was a petrol station called FINA. And every time I see that name, that logo, I think of the petrol company FINA. I don't know if it exists anymore. But yeah, still, there is nothing about FINA that screams out swimming to me. I don't know about you two guys.
We have seen some other sports rebrand. So the IAAF became World Athletics. I suppose we can't really see FINA change its name to reflect just swimming because it has other elements to it, like water polo and diving too. But I don't think they can go with World Water Sports, really.
No, I think that would be a step or at least a stroke too far. But there are other international sporting federations who've managed to keep their acronyms and very recognisable. FIFA, for one, but maybe that's certainly in terms of the eyes of the youth of the world, is partly connected to a very famous video game. But Tariq, we've learned, I think, this week that partnership may no longer be continuing.
Yeah, extremely difficult, tense situation here between FIFA and Electronic Arts, the California-based games manufacturer that makes FIFA the video game. There have been talks for about 2 years or more now about renewing a 10-year contract that expires at the end of the Qatar World Cup next year, about whether they're going to continue. The thing is, this partnership has been hugely beneficial for both. FIFA, the video game, essentially owns the football sector in its market, and probably the most popular sports game or among the most popular video games, earns billions off the back of that. Between 2003 and 2020, I think they generated about $20 billion in sales, and FIFA gets about $150 million a year from licensing its name to this company. It doesn't have to do much at all, FIFA. It just says, yep, you can use our name and we'll give you rights to the World Cup every 4 years. And it gets paid handsomely. It's the highest, like I said, money earner for FIFA. Last year, it amounted to about, maybe because of the pandemic, but it shows you how big it is, about 50% of FIFA's total take for the year. FIFA, these football organisation. The talks have been stuck partly because of money. I understand FIFA wants more than $350 million for that relationship to continue, because it's thinking, hang on, EA has done extremely well out of this. But the other reason is because it wants to kind of limit the exclusivity to a football game, and perhaps have the opportunity to give the FIFA brand to other companies, other gaming companies potentially that would be rivals to EA. And look, I think we're weeks away from a potential collapse of this. The people at EA, I understand, have done a lot of number crunching, a lot of analysis as to what it would mean to change the name of the game. And what they would lose is this very famous name, obviously extremely popular. FIFA to millions of people only means a computer game, so that's a very powerful thing. But what they don't lose is pretty much any of their game playing elements. They have all the teams that they do licenses with. They have leagues. They have players. They've got about 300 to 350 different licenses.
They signed a new deal with FIFA as well this week.
So what they wouldn't really lose much. Compare this to if they've got a game, a very popular game called Madden in the United States about American football. And that is predicated on two main licenses, one with the NFL and one with the NFL Players Union. If it lost those, for example, those two, it doesn't have a game. And that isn't the case in this instance. So, FIFA, Gianni Infantino wants to host all these new events, he'll need money coming in. I'm not sure this is a contract worth losing. It's one to watch.
It's interesting because I think the FIFA Pro deal gives it the image rights to use players' names and images and stuff like that, from what I understand. And actually, that's not a bad name for an alternative video game, is it? FIFA Pro, because you've got the pro aspect of it, and you've got the FIFA aspect of it.
Resonates with Pro Evo as well from the football gaming world.
Exactly.
Back in the day, Rob.
Yeah, and we have actually seen FIFA benefit considerably from the game in recent years in terms of image cleansing. Think of after the 2015 arrest. Many might have thought FIFA just scraps the governing body name, but what was holding it up was the beloved nature of the game and so many actually being associating football with playing it.
Yeah. Potentially also, I think there's been a lot of change in the commercial department at FIFA, and a lot of thinking, a lot of people pitching them different ideas, and the world is changing. We talked about the digital economy a little bit on this with tokens and NFTs and all these other things. And I think that also is clouding these talks. FIFA think there's a lot more money for them to get in the marketplace, but sometimes, you're going to risk this money in hand. And the other point is the relationship is based on a minimum guarantee and a royalty agreement. So what the EA guys are saying, yeah, all of these things you want, we might be able to do them too, and you'll benefit because it's a royalty relationship. So throwing the baby out with the bathwater or whatever here in this case, starting from scratch, and there's no one potentially that can match them for the game because they've already got all these other licenses we mentioned. I think in the end we might see calm heads prevail, even at FIFA House, with all the various madness we've talked about in recent weeks, and this deal needs to stay in place for them.
And it was quite unusual of EA to actually go public with this, announcing that they were reviewing the partnership with FIFA, which certainly shows they wanted to sort of raise the stakes in the public negotiations over the future of the game.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I spoke to Peter Moore, latterly of Liverpool, the chief executive there until he left last year. He was at EA Sports for a decade, been at Microsoft before that. He said he couldn't recall a public statement like that. So yeah, absolutely high stakes. Whether it's a negotiation tactic or not, time will tell.
Maybe it's also reflective of some of the wider battles we talk about in football, because the FIFA game is full of things like the Champions League and other UEFA competitions, yet it has the FIFA name on the outside of the packet.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most famous rappers in the world, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, of course, FIFA are never quiet. And this week, the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, has been across the Middle East, and he's been in Israel. And quite predictably from him, as he lands in a nation, he started talking about the possibility of that country hosting the World Cup.
One day I was asked for the World Cup in Israel. Well, why not thinking about indeed the World Cup between Israel and the neighboring countries? Why not? We have to dream big. We have to bring the world together.
It just seems to be that when somebody dons the mantle of FIFA president, that their sort of ultimate ambition seems to be to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Sepp Blatter was obsessed by it, and now I think Gianni Infantino is equally sort of taken by this prospect. He's suggesting Israel and Palestine co-host a World Cup in the future,
and with the UAE potentially involved too in the hosting.
Well, that partnership's probably more likely than anything with the Palestinians, because Gianni Infantino made sure he was present when the Abraham Accords were signed last year. That essentially made peace between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. Finally, with UAE recognizing Israel and allowing travel of Israeli citizens into the UAE and business relationships, Gianni was front and center. He likes to be seen as a man at the forefront of not just these football debates, but these major diplomatic talks in the world. And he was there. The thing about this trip, where he was promoting the idea of a joint World Cup between Israel and Palestine, and is that a trip to see the Palestinian authorities was cancelled by them because of Gianni Infantino attending an event at a venue that the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people find a little bit offensive, and it tells you about the tensions involved in the region still. And this sort of crass offhand statement, Smiley saying, "Yeah, one day we'll have a World Cup." I just think it rubs people up the wrong way because these are real lives. People are living there. There is difficulty on both sides, and people are suffering. Just chucking in, "Oh yeah, why not a World Cup?" I just think it annoys a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree with that, Tariq. It seems a pointless statement to make at this point in time.
Isn't he just giving them hope, going to a country that's never hosted a major event and actually sort of thinking, actually they can play a part in the World Cup and maybe actually helping to bring the region together in a way that Israel on its own couldn't host a World Cup, Jordan couldn't host a World Cup, even the UAE, which doesn't actually have large stadiums, and it's a way of potentially doing so?
Yeah, why not? If that's what you think his motivation is, sure. Well, he's off to South America the weekend, and I'm sure he'll be making the same. He'll be asked, and maybe in a press conference, El Presidente, do you think Venezuela can host the World Cup? Because I believe he's due there next week. So yes, why not? You and your neighbours, I'm sure you can do it. He's talking to his football constituency too. He's going to say yes to everyone. Isn't that how these elections work? And their popularity contests, presidents need a lot of buy-in, and you offer everyone whatever they want.
Arsene Wenger saying this week he's got growing support for plans for a World Cup every 2 years, but we've been hearing from new figures opposing Gareth Southgate for the first time, the England manager, who kept more of a measured opinion, now actually questioning how the plans keep on changing from Wenger, and certainly far more of a skeptic too, as we edge towards a FIFA Council meeting next week as well.
Yeah, mind you, if there is going to be a World Cup every 2 years, you're going to drum up as many hosts as you possibly can. So maybe that's why Infantino is suggesting it, because it's not going to be a case of people bidding. I think it's going to be a case of searching out exactly who can host a 48-team tournament and all the expense that entails.
Well, one place where Gianni Infantino knows would gladly take a World Cup is Saudi Arabia, and now the dust has started to settle on the takeover by the Public Investment Fund of Newcastle United. A lot more scrutiny just on how this takeover was approved, why it was approved, and indeed this desperate desire for us to try to dissociate the PIF from the Saudi state. Now the new ownership is getting in place, though. We're yet to actually see or hear publicly from the PF officials. It's the very much minority shareholder who's been far more prominent in the early days of the Saudi consortium's control of Newcastle.
Yeah, suddenly like Newcastle's own queen. Is it right, Rob? I think there's a song now, isn't there? I thought someone released a song. Is that right? Do you have that?
Yeah, let's take a listen to how the Newcastle United fans have welcomed Amanada Staveley to the club.
A trophy's a dream. We just want glory, handful memories. The change is coming, Amanda. You came and you said this from Ashley, and you took it away, Amanda. You fixed it to save the tsunami, and we love you today, Amanda.
Well, straight in at number one, I guess, given the fact that if you had 30,000 people tuning in to watch their High Court hearing against the Premier League last month, then I'm sure they'll be able to get that to number one in the charts very, very quickly. Interesting around the takeover. PCP Cattle Partners, the company owned by Amanada Staveley, about 18 months ago, it took out a charge. So if you look on Companies House, there's a charge, basically a loan facility with Mike Ashley's company, St James's Holdings, up to £150 million. Now, that charge is still there. People I've heard, spokesmen have said that no money has been taken out of that loan facility. But if you look at the accounts of that company, quite unclear where the 30 million to buy 10% of the company is going to come from. It's certainly not going to come from the company's assets, because from what the most recent account said, it had debts of £3 million. So I think she said she's using her family's money to buy it.
This whole thing we discussed on last week's pod, and this is now the third pod where we've mentioned the takeover, about this claim of the PIF being autonomous from the Saudi state. And I've been thinking about this a bit more. Let's think about PIF again. The board features at the top Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince's chair. Below him, there are 6 ministers on the board from the Saudi state. There's the advisor to the royal court. And then there is this new non-executive chairman of Newcastle, who likes to be addressed as His Excellency. And looking at that, they are the body in control of PIF. The Premier League tell us they have legally binding guarantees. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has nothing to do with it. Well, how does the Public Investment Fund assess the football club it owns 80% of at a board meeting when virtually everyone on the board is from the Saudi government?
More questions than answers.
Yes, I think it suits the Saudi Arabians at the moment to leave things to Amanada Staveley, because they can then point to the fact that they've given these guarantees to the Premier League, that they're not going to interfere in the running of the club, and they can just point to that. Just going back to Staveley's money, I just should say that she did say back immediately after the takeover that she said, "I'm investing my family's money." So she made clear where she's getting her money from that point of view.
I actually have to make a correction on something I said last week. I said it's the world's biggest sovereign wealth fund. It actually isn't. It's in the top 10. I think it's about the 9th largest, but it has the ambition by the end of the decade of becoming the world's largest. More than $1.5 trillion it hopes to get to. So let me make that correction.
That's quite a league table there of sovereign wealth funds.
Yeah, there is a league table. They're out of the top 4 at the moment. Maybe by the middle of the year they're getting to those Champions League places.
They'll qualify to invest in Europe.
Steve Bruce could be the new chairman.
Well, he's certainly survived longer in the Newcastle job than we expected this week, with talk of him going early in the week not bearing out. Well, we want to hear from Richard Masters, the Premier League Chief Executive, on just why this protracted takeover was finally approved. So does the Liverpool manager, Jurgen Klopp. He wants some more details from the Premier League too about it.
I actually was waiting for some official statements about it, like from Richard Masters or somebody else. Because we all know there are obviously concerns about human rights issues. I think that's all clear, that we all think the same there. So didn't happen in the first place, happening then. Still, that's the situation. What will it mean for football? That's few months ago, I think we had a massive argument issue. I would say the whole football world with 12 clubs or so trying to build a super league, and rightly so. Didn't happen, but this is kind of creating a super team, if you want. It's pretty much the same. Guaranteed spots in the Champions League, not in a few years' time, not immediately. All these kind of things. With all the how financial fair play is used nowadays, well, nobody knows exactly is it still existing or not, stuff like this. So it's like it is. So everybody knows that. Newcastle fans will love it, of course. But for the rest of it just means there's a new superpower in Newcastle. I cannot avoid that. Money cannot buy everything, but can over time, it will take time, but over time they will have enough money to make a few wrong decisions, to make then the right decisions, and then they will be where they want to be. So that's how it is. I don't think that's to avoid in the long term, but that's the situation. Everybody knows that, and obviously the Premier League or Richard Masters thought, let's give it a go. I don't know it, but it's not the first time. It's just the third, as far as I know, the third club who's now owned by a country. So I'm not sure how many countries are still out there to have the financial power and the interest to do so, but this is how it is, and that's what everybody has to deal with.
Jurgen Klopp certainly intrigued, just like us all, with the new financing of Newcastle United. Maybe he'd relish some of that spending too, rather than from the Fenway Sports Group. And there has been focus since the takeover from defenders of it, particularly Newcastle fans, saying, why are Newcastle getting all this attention over PIF investment when the fund also has stakes in the likes of Uber as well? Well, the significant difference is this is Newcastle United having a controlling stake. They own the majority of Newcastle. They don't own the majority of Uber. And very much this is a prestige investment. I mean, some others saying, if they really wanted to sports wash, they would invest in some big multinational company. Well, actually, what we're seeing with Newcastle is their success in securing this loyal band of so many tens of thousands of Newcastle backers now not only defending the Saudi state, but in a minority of cases, we're seeing a few social media posts where they're almost sort of seizing on the death of Jamal Khashoggi in terms of treating journalistic critics.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen Newcastle fans, sort of suggesting, sharing anti-Khashoggi propaganda and stuff about his fiance. So that's definitely a factor. But and also, it's not just sport washing. It's also the fact that you're getting your brand, the Saudi brand, out there. And you have to say there are billions of people who watch Premier League football, and they are going to be the Saudi link is going to be there, isn't it? And it's a non-controversial way of getting your name of your country out there, or your brand.
Not sure it's without its controversies, as we keep repeating on this podcast. But yeah, like it's such a big platform, isn't it, for whatever it is you want to do. But Rob, do you think one of the reasons why they're in the background is because of this weird separation agreement? They have to, and not saying they're going to spend huge amounts of money buying, the top 10 players in the world, because they're saying that they're not owned by the Saudi state, but a rational investment company that needs to, have a sound investment decisions and make a profit. That might be one reason why, despite all the supposed media briefings that Steve Bruce was going to be out in hours, that, it's for a week at least, he's still in place.
And Steve Bruce did have a little dig at the media ahead of what will be his 1,000th game in management against Tottenham now, over those reports that said he would ought to be out of a job before that game.
It's been difficult, of course, but as I said, I hope you guys are getting a slap now from your bosses to say that you haven't done your job. Whoever your source was, whoever it was who's feeding you, didn't get it right. So I hope you're feeling a bit of heat.
Those doubts about Bruce's job longevity didn't come out of nowhere, though. That's why we had that really curious statement from Newcastle on Friday ahead of Sunday's game against Tottenham, confirming Steve Bruce would be manager. How many clubs do you get happen to confirm that their manager is still in charge? And then we had Amanada Staveley making reference to potential change, which she said doesn't always happen overnight. And she said, curiously, if we make any changes going forward, Steve will be the first to know.
It's not as easy as they thought. And again, they can't just spend huge amounts of money, because that would suggest that this isn't an investment proposition, but maybe the Saudi state does have a role in it. And then those Premier League legally binding agreements might come into question.
Time now to introduce this week's special guest. Joining us from the FA is Edeline John, the Director of International Corporate Affairs and co-partner for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. Edeline, welcome to Sport Unlocked.
Thank you so much for having me. Really delighted to be here.
We are speaking to you at the end of another week that's seen Hungarian fans being involved in racist abuse, this time at Wembley at the start of the England game, which led to disorder as police tried to go and arrest the person who'd been abusive towards the steward. Last month, it was England players being subjected to racist abuse in Budapest. It led to the next World Cup qualifier in the Hungarian capital at the start of October being played behind closed doors. Now, Hungary has repeatedly been ordered to play games without fans at home over the last decade as punishment for racism. Do you think these punishments need to be accompanied with more of a roadmap in terms of countries having to implement education programs to try to drive change amongst their fan base? So it's not just punitive sanctions, but finding a way of preventing the racism, particularly as we see with Hungary, there is repeated abuse.
Look, I think it's going to be different in each country's context, and each FA will have a different mechanism and approach by which they govern the elements of their game as it relates to the equality, diversity and inclusion piece. I think if I think about us from an English FA standpoint, I think that engagement and that education with fan groups, communicating with them is really, really key and really, really critical, because we want them to best represent us as a nation, but also the football team, right? And I suspect that it is challenging if there are situations where the fan group are not aligning with that perspective and not aligning with that view. But I think that's where actually the international relationships can be really powerful and really positive, where you can share best practice and learn from others and say, what is it that you're doing that means your fans might be being more positive or being more supportive or being more respectful? And I think there's a lot for all of us to learn in that regard.
Something I wasn't at Wembley, just as a viewer. I found it really strange, and I grew up around there as well. So my school was mainly black and Asian, and I was a steward as well when I was a kid. And I must say, I really shouldn't have been a steward at the old Wembley, and everyone looked like me. Now, the 1,000 ultras of Hungary that were in that stadium, they were there to. You know what they were going to do. We knew what they were going to do. You know, the entire stadium in Hungary booed the England players not that long ago, and they caused trouble. Jeered taking the knee when they had the Euro games. I just found it really strange how, again, after what happened, in the summer, how badly prepared everyone was for what happened this week with the clashes involving the police. And I also thought of, 17, 18-year-old me having to stand there, because I could see kids at Wembley who looked like me, going to face, for minimum wage, these Hungarian ultras. I just didn't understand what was going on. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, look, we from our perspective continue to engage on this as a topic and an issue. Of course, we work to make sure that from an operations side, our relevant colleagues are supporting the training of stewards, engaging with the police on this topic. As I said, one of the key things that's changed post-Euros is that direct connectivity into the police in a way that I personally, in my role, hadn't had before, and now have really directly and are able to engage in conversation and preparation. We're also really clear on the messages that we put out before matches, right? So you will have seen, for those in stadium, there was pre-match communication about the importance of treating each other with respect, behaving in an appropriate way. But let's be clear, the challenges that we see in Wembley Stadium, or the challenges that we see in football, are not unique and solely happening within football. These are societal issues. And as it relates to what happened in that stadium, of course, we've got to let FIFA carry out the investigation and establish the facts. And I don't have all of the details and the facts, and we have to let that process run. But we have to recognise that actually one of the things we are passionate about, and one of the things we are clear about, is that we don't want discrimination taking place within the game, whether that's towards players, towards fellow spectators, towards stewards, police, or anybody. And so for us, it's about making sure that we're clear on our position, we're clear on our message, but that we're supporting the relevant individuals wherever and however we can to make sure that these types of incidents, if proven to be the case, they don't keep happening, because that's not what we want in football. We do want an environment, like you say, Tariq, where actually people from all communities can come along, can feel safe, can feel supported, and can feel part of what should be a really positive activity, irrespective of kind of what the end result is on the pitch.
Is that something you see with particularly the drinking culture amongst England fans, which might put off a more diverse fan base? And we don't always sort of see it from other countries around the world, this sort of almost sometimes quasi-nationalistic element sort of taking over city squares and that sort of expression and manifestation of Englishness as sort of some fans see it.
I think the reality is, look, we always want fans for any sport or indeed any country to celebrate and get behind their national team or their local team. I think the reality is people are really passionate about football, and sometimes that can manifest in really positive ways, and for some individuals that does manifest in less positive ways. I think what we have to continue to do is to be clear on what it is we want from our fans, what it is actually our players want from our fans, and make sure that we're getting those messages out there in the most proactive way as we can. I mean, if we again look back to the Euros, we saw and heard direct from Gareth, one of the most senior spokespeople speaking for himself, but also on behalf of the FA as an employee, who was really clear on what he wanted that tournament, that team, and that kind of event to stand for. Now, we cannot control individuals across society, just like no other sport can control individuals across society, but we hope that we can continue to engage in dialogue, to be clear on our position, and to make sure that actually what we're doing is representing ourselves as a nation, be that fans, players, coaches, and anything else, in the most positive way that we can. And that's all that we can try to drive forward.
I mean, that is something notable from the English FA, unlike compared with some other countries, that there is strong messaging from the top saying, don't do this, don't boo taking a knee, respect the players, don't boo national anthems. We don't always see that from many countries. And yet there is that sort of oddity, I sensed it even amongst some England fans on the way to the final in July against Italy. You've got these anti-Italian chants that I hadn't heard before, and it's this sort of almost sort of default reaction to start insulting countries, which is almost something, I don't know how it's obviously quite a challenge educationally to sort of change the tone of a fan base.
Absolutely, and it does have to be education and engagement and meeting people where they are. I think we never, from an English FA standpoint, want to feel like or seem like we're kind of, being a parent or telling people what to do. But I think we do want to help people to understand the impact that some of those actions have, how that can make individuals feel, how that can make people feel excluded and not like they can be part of something. And exactly as you say, it's not, a positive experience to hear anti-anything chants taking place towards a group based on a protected characteristic or based on nationality. Now, I don't think English fans are the only people that do it. I think it's really fair to say that actually it does happen across the board. But I do think that we, as the English FA, have a responsibility to continue to engage in that dialogue, to continue to provide that awareness on the impact, irrespective of what the intent is. We have to recognise impact, and we have to have those difficult and challenging conversations.
How have you seen this season in terms of racism online?
Yeah, so we, of course, still are trying to drive out the abuse that you can see from a discriminatory standpoint across social media organisations. We've continued to monitor and report across the entirety of football. So we have engaged an external partner who do the reporting and monitoring piece for us. I think what I can say is going into this season, we've been a lot more coordinated and connected, not just from an English football perspective, but also with law enforcement. Having kind of built and developed on what happened over the course of the Euros, I think we have kind of more direct lines of communication now, and we're really trying to make sure that we do everything in our power to drive this forward. We're really clear, and we know that our power is limited, and it's social media organisations that can, of course, make the actual change to their platforms, but we're continuing to kind of challenge them, ask them questions, but also to work alongside government to make sure that the legislation that we hope will come in soon is fit for purpose as it relates to, frankly, holding social media organisations to account. We know it's a journey. We really wish social media organisations would act more quickly, but it's one that we're committed to tackling.
Do the increasingly the phrase zero tolerance is redundant? We've seen Facebook and Instagram certainly don't have zero tolerance, however much they want to say, because you can be persistently racist and stay on the platform. And, and in some cases, actually, you do actually, of course, need a fair process. So there isn't zero tolerance in the sense you don't just ban someone immediately from the game without hearings, etc. So is it that phrase is overused and it sort of masks actually inaction in places?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's about recognising and challenging kind of the structures that are in place. I think you're right. I think what we have not necessarily done a good job of is communicating what the context is sometimes around that level of tolerance. Like you say, there does have to be a process of an investigation. It's not about a cancel culture where people are ejected without understanding, without establishing the facts, and without having that level of understanding. But I do think that we're really clear that we do want a game that's free from discrimination, right? We're not saying we want a game that has a little bit of discrimination. We're saying we do want a game that's free from discrimination. And so you could argue that is absolutely around zero tolerance. It's not something that we want in our game. And I think we've been really clear on that and will continue to be. But there are different mechanisms by which we'll drive that. And education and engagement is one element of that.
We do see questions over why the FA pursues a case against an offensive tweet from a player from before their career started, when they're a young teenager, that only gets exposed many years later. How do you confront those cases and some of the questions over why they are prosecuted?
Well, I think there are a number of elements around the kind of legal sanctions piece, and looking at time, method of communication. Was it something that was written on Twitter or an email, or was it something that was said? And that's really the role of the kind of legal and sanctions area of our organisation, is to look at all of the facts, establish the facts, to understand the context, and then to make an appropriate decision. That's exactly why it's not just a case of it's a one rule fits all. And that's an important part of the process, I think. But we have to also recognise that with certain roles comes certain responsibilities. And I think we have to be open and honest about that, so that people don't think that the excuse of ignorance or the excuse of lack of awareness can be a get out for behaving in what might be a discriminatory way.
I know, obviously, it's not been easy with a pandemic for you to sort of get out and about internationally, but just talk a bit about your international role and how things have gone there.
Yeah, so exactly as you say, Martyn, because of the kind of backdrop of the global pandemic, travel isn't something I've been able to do across the globe yet, but something I'm looking forward to doing more. So a lot of the relationships that I've been striving to develop have, of course, been on Teams and online. But we do continue to engage with the international landscape on a number of issues, of which, of course, equality, diversity and inclusion is just one. We also have to understand that different countries are at different stages of their journey. We all face different challenges, and we all have different cultures, different things that we think are appropriate or acceptable. And we have to be respectful as we engage with different communities and understand where they are at versus where we are at. Do I think, the English football landscape is entirely popular across the globe? I'm not sure, and I don't feel I can kind of make an assertion, but what I do know is, if I think about the work that we're trying to do in the English FA, it's about not just kind of promoting our sport and our national team and the work that we do, but it's actually about how we can effectively collaborate with others, because we recognise that there's lots that we can learn from the work that others have done, but also lots that we can share. So our kind of goal or focus or objective from my perspective is actually, what is it that we can all do to make football across the globe a better place to participate, to be involved in, that's representative of various communities. And for me, that's about engaging in a positive way, sharing knowledge, asking questions and striving to learn.
One thing we've seen FIFA introduce in recent years, things like a human rights code. It sort of crosses over your diversity, inclusion and international briefs, and so much more. We see it with scrutiny with the Saudi Arabia takeover of Newcastle and Qatar World Cup, which obviously England will be hoping to qualify for next year, and how you as an FA and how English football more broadly, engages, say, with countries that have human rights issues and avoid exposing staff to human rights abuses. How much a challenging part of that, and how do you deal with that in terms of how football might, and you as an FA have to deal with countries that have human rights records that are questioned by the likes of Amnesty and others, and indeed have policies that say laws that anti-LGBT as well?
It's absolutely about engaging, and we think that change is best achieved if you can work in a collaborative way. I don't think that kind of always coming in and stepping in and saying, here are all the things that you do wrong, is the way to really achieve collaborative change in a positive way. Just as in the same way, if we think about, us as a society in England, we wouldn't appreciate others coming in and telling us this is the law that you should implement and this is what you should do. So for us, it's about actually having the dialogue, understanding what's happening on the ground. It's really one thing to form a perspective when you're not there, you haven't been in the culture, you haven't been in the community and don't know what's happening on the ground. And so we want to continue to engage and understand what is actually happening right there on the ground in countries where there are discussions around challenges from a human rights perspective. But we also want to continue to engage with a suite of organisations, because we don't want a biased perspective. So we do keep in contact with Amnesty. We work with other organisations to understand what is happening, what's the feedback you're hearing, what is it that you're seeing, because we need to form a holistic picture, and we need to understand what is happening in a way to be able to have informed perspectives and informed views. But we want to always continue to collaborate and work with, the likes of FIFA to better understand what's taking place on the ground and to understand the roles and responsibilities. But we see football as a vehicle to drive community change, right? We think that actually, irrespective of what's happening in the various parts of the world across the globe, actually football is a significant vehicle to drive discussions and challenges around not only human rights, but many things that we talk about in society. Even if we think of sport holistically and we think of taking the knee, whilst that absolutely is not where it started, and we know it goes back to over 200 years ago, it kind of comes back to the forefront when it's there in the sporting world, in kind of the public domain's visual capacity for them to see and engage with again. And so football is a vehicle that can drive change, and we have to recognise that, and we need to do that in a collaborative way with nations who maybe are in a different place to us on certain elements.
In terms of increasing the diversity in football, there's the voluntary code, the Football Leadership Diversity Code. All the Premier League clubs have now signed up to it. I think Southampton is the most recent one to make it all 20. I think something like 60% of the Championship clubs, which is a good start. And then there's the elite coaches placement programs. Even Chris Powell, for example, working alongside Gareth Southgate. Can you just talk us through how successful that has been so far, and what more needs to happen in terms of leadership and coaching?
Yeah, so I think we've been really clear that we want the kind of broader football leadership, be that senior administration, be that team operations, or indeed be that coaching, to be more diverse and more representative of the entirety of the English football landscape and indeed society more broadly. And so the Football Leadership Diversity Code, as you say, we launched back in October in the professional side of the game to focus on making sure that we had some targets for clubs and football organisations to work towards. We'll actually be publishing our 1-year update on that later this month, so later in October, which collates and looks at the data as a collective of football and gives some insights around the kind of implementation that certain clubs have had or certain organisations have put into place to really drive forward that change. We're definitely not there yet across football, but I think there is the commitment and the ambition to continue to drive forwards and do more. And things like the Elite Coach Placement Programme are an example of initiative which has helped to provide some opportunity for individuals that maybe hadn't had that level of access to the national team before, where they can go and learn in a slightly different environment. It's a kind of positive action programme focused on giving opportunities to those from historically underrepresented groups. And we recognise that there's more that needs to be done. I think one of the challenges that football has faced for a number of years is really the mechanism by which people are recruited into roles, and that's what we're trying to kind of challenge and change. We're trying to say, actually, there need to be some processes, there needs to be that equality of opportunity, there needs to be visibility about roles so that people can apply for them and put themselves forward. And that needs to be coupled with the chance to enhance and gain more experience and have a chance to kind of showcase your skills. So for us, it's about bringing together the various building blocks, recognising that we're not doing this in isolation as the FA. This is absolutely, cross football. It's clubs, it's the Premier League, it's the EFL, it's the PFA, it's Kick It Out. We have to work together to really drive forward the change that we want to see. And I know I've only been in post for just over a year, but I feel like things are beginning to move in the right direction. And for that, I'm really happy.
We are in Black History Month at the moment. Where do you see in terms of players taking a knee? And also, is one of the things around Black History Month that ideally there wouldn't be a Black History Month because actually the national curriculum would have far more Black history in it all through the year, and actually sport in particular would actually teach more of the Black history?
Yeah, so look, that's a huge question, and a question far beyond football. I think there are always opportunities to make sure that if we look at the education of the next generation, we're talking about all of the things that have happened across the part of history, and we're not hiding anything, and we're being open and honest about the journey that various countries and various nations and various communities have been on. So that's something I'm a huge champion for and of. If I think about football and I think about taking the knee, I think we have to recognise that it's, players' individual choices, and we've been clear from an FA standpoint around our position of supporting and respecting players, and that will stop when players feel it needs to stop. For me, it's a mechanism of peacefully protesting. It's a mechanism of highlighting some of the inequalities and injustices that we see happening across society and across the world. And we see that actually this action or this mechanism of peaceful protest has sparked a lot of conversations. I've had a ton of interviews over the past year with people asking me, what's your perspective on taking the knee? And if that means that we're engaging in dialogue about a part of society or a part of equality, diversity and inclusion that we maybe haven't done as much before, then that is a positive, because it continues to spark that conversation and that dialogue. And I think that's how you win hearts and minds and how you drive forward change, if you engage in the topic of discussion.
And this week I see you've introduced a new plan to try to improve opportunities for disability football, with an increase in participation from the grassroots to the elite level over the next few years.
And that was, triggered by a number of various elements, recognising that we've had pockets of pioneers across our organisation working in the disability space for a while, but actually we haven't previously brought it all together in a connected and a collaborative way. And that is exactly what this plan is striving to do. It's really looking at how we can pull together the great work happening across all of the departments within the organisation to not only focus on what we're doing internally, so fixing the FA from a perspective of making sure we have more disabled representation, making sure we're creating that education and awareness, but also looking at the work that we're doing right from the grassroots space, making sure that people can play, participate in the game for fun, for competitiveness, just in their back garden, right through to the elite end of the game. So making sure that people have the opportunities and the support structures around them to be at the top flight of disability or para footballers, as we call it.
Well, it's a pretty packed agenda you've got, and a pretty packed brief as well. So we're very appreciative of your time today on Sport Unlocked.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to get the thoughts there from Edalee and John at the FA. As we wrap up this week's episode, a quick whiz through some other stories. Tariq, what's been catching your eye?
Well, for me, it was a really big story here in the US in NBA. Brooklyn Nets, Kyrie Irving, he's been suspended by his team from playing in any games because he's unvaccinated. Under local laws, in New York laws, he wouldn't be allowed to play anyway, because they state that unvaccinated players can't practice or play in arenas, so he'd be banned from their home games. But the US is such a hodgepodge that those sort of rules aren't the same. So he could have played on the road games, but the team took a decision to bar him from all of its games. And he actually hasn't really explained why he isn't taking the vaccine. He went on Instagram Live this week and he said, do what's best for you, but I'm not an advocate for either side. I'm doing what's best for me. I know the consequences here, and if it means that I'm judged and demonized for that, that's just what it is. That's the role I play. But it'd be interesting to know why someone like Kyrie Irving isn't taking the vaccine. Also, he's such a prominent player. He's not just another basketball player. He's an all-star, 7-time all-star. Played 54 games last season. I wonder what impact he would have on other players and fans who follow the game.
I think it's a really fascinating story. I'm also quite surprised, actually, that in America that they've actually imposed these actual vaccination restrictions on professional sport. Because I think there would be a sort of strong. I'll start again. So, because I think if they try to do that in the Premier League, for example, I think there'd be quite a lot of resistance. And also, I also don't see from a sort of practical point of view why you have to have this insistence on it, because we know that it's very, very possible to get COVID if you're even if you're double vaccinated, and so. Although it's a sort of protection against the symptoms, and it's a good thing, absolutely a very good thing to have, I think you're just as better off relying on tests just as much.
Well, that's certainly been an issue that rumbles on, but that's about it for us this week. That's all from myself, Rob Harris, from Martyn, Ziegler and Tariq Panja. If you've got any thoughts or comments or want to check out extra video content, you can check our social channels for the pod at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Whatever sport you're viewing in the days ahead, I hope it's enjoyable. Goodbye for now.